Hello, thank you for joining us for home worship. Today is a sermon for the weekend of Sunday, October 17th. And we're continuing our sermon series, We Make the Road by Walking, based on Brian McLaren's book of the same name. Today, the chapter we're looking at is entitled Freedom, so I've entitled the sermon Freedom. And one of the scriptures that McLaren gives us for this chapter about freedom and what it means to be free in the context of the Judeo-Christian tradition, one of the scriptures he gives us is the familiar story of the woman caught in adultery. And so from John chapter 8, verses 1 through 11, I'll be reading from the Common English Bible. And Jesus went to the Mount of Olives. Early in the morning, he returned to the temple. All the people gathered around him, and he sat down and taught them. The legal experts and Pharisees brought a woman caught in adultery. And placing her at the center of the group, they said to Jesus, "Teacher, this woman was caught in the act of committing adultery. In the law, Moses commanded us to stone women like this. What do you say?" They said this to test him, because they wanted a reason to bring an accusation against him. Jesus bent down and wrote on the ground with his finger. They continued to question him. So he stood up and replied, "Whoever hasn't sinned should throw the first stone." Bending down again, he wrote on the ground. Those who heard him went away, one by one, beginning with the elders. Finally, only Jesus and the woman were left in the middle of the crowd. Jesus stood up and said to her, "Woman, where are they? Is there no one to condemn you?" She said, "No one, sir." Jesus said, "Neither do I condemn you. Go, and from now on, don't sin anymore." The gospel of our Lord Jesus Christ. So Jesus, a rabbi, steeped in the tradition, sees the confrontation with the woman caught in adultery as another person to set free. Freedom, according to McLaren, is an act of God, not just spiritual, but also physical, economic, environmental. Freedom is important to God. The pandemic has been so politicized, and in the context of freedom, I think that's a shame. So I'm going to politicize it even further. Freedom, such a buzzword when discussing mask wearing and vaccination. Usually, it is in the context of the freedom not to do either of those things, to keep yourself and your neighbors safe. And of course, be free to roll the dice. Take your chances with a deadly respiratory infection. Just don't bring all that noise into my neighborhood. I've lost too many people. The reality we live in today is a time in which our freedoms are limited by this virus. Bottom line, virus is killing us and it's communicable. Our freedom to gather, to travel, to pass the peace at church, all been limited. Truthfully, I thought the vaccine would be the answer. We could all go back to doing some of those things. And it's proven in legitimate scientific studies and demonstrated through the historical lens. Think about the polio vaccine. And even from me, from my own personal experience, that groups of vaccinated people are better able to avoid the virus entirely. In a community of vaccinated individuals, your likelihood to get infected is 10,000 to 1. I attended a family wedding in August. Everyone was vaccinated. The Delta variant was on the rise. We were over 200 people eating and drinking and hugging and singing and dancing. Not one of the family or guests got sick from the gathering. That says something. In March of 2020, when the world slowed to a stop, I was free. I didn't feel free. I worried every day that I might get sick, that my daughter would fall behind in school going online, or that I wasn't doing enough for my congregation who were just as scared as I was. But I was free because in this house, we never lost our income. We could afford to stay home and didn't have to risk our health to put food on the table. There's freedom in that. I didn't realize it at the time. In June, many people that work for in-person type jobs, from restaurant servers to pharmacists to ER nurses to Amazon drivers, hairdressers, and custodians, they were all working, back to work, while the rest of us stayed home. These workers were out there risking their lives to keep our society, our economy, running. People who work for an hourly wage, I will be forever grateful to. Because when they can't work, they don't earn. They have to risk their lives to make ends meet. They don't have the freedom I do to stay safely at home. In fact, 42% of Americans don't have that kind of freedom or luxury. But what would we do without their labor anyway? It's a question, and I don't have an answer to it. But it's one of the effects of the pandemic on all of us. I just know that an economic disparity in our country got way worse when the pandemic hit. And it asked people not only to work for a low wage and risk that, but to risk their lives to keep working so that we could have our economy running. And risk their lives, they did. And die, they did. So when we talk about freedom to not get a vaccine or not wear a mask, in addition to actual personal liberties, which are important, we're talking about the freedom to put others at risk for infection. That's part of that freedom. People who don't have a choice, no safety net, no soft bounce to transition between jobs. Now, this is still America, and I do support the freedom to choose to wear a mask or get a vaccine, the latter being a very important and invasive medical decision. And if you decide not to take the precautions, I think the rule should be that if you have the freedom to say no, you have the freedom to stay away from the rest of us. Is it fair that one person's freedom infringes on the safety of others? Fine, don't wear a mask, don't get the vaccine, but don't come around here. And these are the ones that are keeping the rest of us from being free, right? But that's just me. I wonder what Jesus would say about this, about how we, me, myself, people around me, all those social media poster people, would say about the way in which we've dealt with the pandemic. What would Jesus tell us? Well, he might be concerned that it's turned our hearts cold against our neighbors. He might be saddened that we are all scattering to our corners in the country, trying to keep the other out. The argument I just laid out, self-righteously proclaiming that my decision to wear a mask everywhere and get vaccinated and get my whole family and my whole community basically vaccinated, was somehow superior to another person's decision. Jesus might think differently about my attitude, might think differently about what I just laid out in this sermon. Jesus might feel differently about people that I would rather dismiss because they haven't been participating in the society like I would have them. Jesus might feel differently about my cold heart and attitude. Maybe we, all the people who think like I do, are the ones carrying around the stones to throw at her or him or them. And Jesus comes and says, "What makes you so perfect? Is this what you call righteousness? Did the woman deserve the punishment? Yes. No question. She was caught in adultery, in the act. Does she receive the deserved punishment? No. She does not, because Jesus sets her free. It turns the question about freedom on its head. Jesus sets her free. Jesus does not condemn her like I would have for her being an anti-vax QAnon Fruit Loop. But he says, is there no one here to condemn you? Neither do I condemn you. Go and sin no more. Maybe today, in the context of this, he would say, go and have a care for those around you. What can you do to make the world a safer place for people other than just yourself? You see how the story of the woman caught in adultery can be applied to us today? Just because she can do better doesn't give me the right to carry around my stone, ready to strike at her and others like her. We cannot argue and convince. We cannot judge and lecture and browbeat. We cannot stone people who we think are wrong with words. We can't do that and expect a transformation. It's not the way to change minds and melt hearts and warm lives. That only comes through love. That's what Jesus does here. He stands against the forces of destruction with the weapon of love. His love buys her freedom. His love buys our freedom. And if we are going to follow Jesus and do as he asks us over and over and over again in the Gospels, if we're going to follow him, we will act as he acts. We will not only follow his teachings, but also his example. When we want to argue, we will love. When we want to lecture, we will love. When we want to judge, we will love. When we want to throw stones, we will stop and we will love. And lives will be transformed. And one great day, this kind of love will set us all free. So when you think about a person and their freedoms that they claim infringing upon yours, maybe have a care. They might be wrong, you might be right, but they're human beings too. And Jesus' love for us is no greater than it is for them. In fact, he has no thems. So have a care for the world around you. If you're like me, you're angry, you're frustrated, you have the evidence to prove your case, but you need to take that stone and lay it down. I don't know what it'll mean for you in your personal life, but I know for me, reading this story again in this new light has melted my heart of stone so that I might approach with love. Because we want people to change their minds. We want people to grow and approach the throne of grace with clean hands. We don't want to punish each other, really. So let's love each other. What the world needs now is love. It's the only thing that there's just too little of. Amen.